On Iran, the Strait of Hormuz remains caught in a dangerous grey zone between war and peace. There is now a tenuous diplomatic push underway to extend the ceasefire and reopen the strait. But any first phase agreement between US and Iran must be followed by deeper talks about the nuclear stockpile, but other critical issues for regional security. The EU can contribute with technical expertise when it comes to nuclear talks, for example. The EU is helping to protect the freedom of navigation in the region, including through Operation Aspides. We have already reinforced the mission with more ships, but additional capabilities will be required if we want to do more. At the same time, the EU is stepping up our security and defense cooperation with the Gulf countries. Beyond Iran, we also discussed other issues in the Middle East and other crises. In Lebanon, the ceasefire appears to be more nominal by the day. Return to full-scale war is a real possibility. We also discussed Gaza and the West Bank, including possible restrictions on the trade linked to settlements, and sanctions to ministers was also raised. But as Gimni format is a place where we don't do decisions, so we will revert to this issue back to when we are having the Foreign Affairs Council in Luxembourg. Then on Russia. The dynamics of the war are shifting in Ukraine's favor. Russia is on the back foot militarily, economically, but also diplomatically. But as the latest strikes on Kiev have shown, Russia still shows no genuine interest in peace, which was also the clear view of the ministers today. Moscow's direct threat to kill foreign diplomats in Kiev is a public announcement of a war crime. Today, we also discussed our own European core security interests regarding Russia. It is good that ministers had the chance to reflect, and we had really thorough discussions on what concessions Europe should ask from Moscow and what our red lines are. And one thing is very clear. Europe will never be a neutral mediator between Russia and Ukraine, because we are on Ukraine's side and we are defending our own core security interests. I put forward a discussion paper already in February, but just let me recall a few of the points that were there. Unconditional ceasefire is a prerequisite for any kind of peace negotiations. That was also underlined by ministers today. Russia must stop sabotage operations, cyber attacks, election interference, airspace violations across Europe. Limiting Ukraine's military while Russia rearms would directly threaten European security. If there are gaps for Ukraine's army, there must be also limitations for Russia's. There can be no legal recognition of the occupied Ukrainian territory. There must be also accountability, and that is very important. Russia must cooperate with the international investigations and should pay for destruction it has caused. Any peace agreement must fully accept Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and right to choose its own alliances. And of course, there are broader security concerns when we look at the presence of Russian troops in countries such as Georgia and Moldova. It is clearly in Europe's interest that these forces are no longer stationed there. There are more issues, of course. It was a long paper, but let me leave it there. Also, ministers were proposing some new ideas that should be there. But the bottom line is this. Europe has valid demands to ensure that any peace is lasting, and the ministers asked me to take this work forward. Ministers also discussed how to increase the pressure on Russia globally. Too many countries continue to do business with Moscow while simultaneously enjoying privileged access to European markets and investments. So Europe must use its leverage more effectively when it comes to trade, investment, market access, partnerships. And this is why we are also preparing new sanctions to Russia, to really pressure them so that they would go from pretending to negotiate to actually come to the negotiation table. Overall, there was a strong unity today to defend European interests, to support Ukraine and put more pressure on Russia. So, dear Konstantinos, thank you again for organizing this wonderful meeting, and thank you for the hospitality that you have shown to all of us here. Thank you.
You didn't mention in your speech any progress or what was the latest on the discussion around having an envoy to talk to Moscow. Was there any unity or guidance given in the room by the ministers, or was it divisions that you saw over the issue? And then just following up on what you said the EU will never be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine, but Ukraine is asking the EU to step in and to get involved and play a bigger role now that the US has stepped back. So are you telling Ukraine you're not going to step in at the moment?
Yes, thank you. As the talk was mostly on the substance, but of course it was also briefly touched upon, so how should we actually move forward with answering the question that you have on who? And the broad consensus was that we have the European institutions, we have the treaties in place, and the treaties provide us framework how we can actually decide on how to go forward. So sticking to the substance, I think this is much more important to be really ready on the issues that we want to see. And the other question was about. Yes, the mediator. The Ukraine's ask has been also about, if you look at their ask, then it is about actually also being, thumb on a scale on their side, because, all the concessions so far have been on Ukrainian side, but there should be also concessions on the Russian side, meaning that we should also help them in these negotiations, but we can't be mediators, really, because we are defending the interests of Europe and the interests of Ukraine, because Ukraine is also in Europe. So that's why, whether it's a ceasefire, whether it's, any other issue that I discussed before, then we can't be mediators, we can't be neutral, treating them equally, because we have been clearly on Ukraine's side.
Can you tell us what kind of exchanges are currently taking place with the United States on this issue? Are there any exchanges at all? And also, perhaps a quick question to both of you. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said last week that apparently only the United States can handle these peace negotiations with Russia on Ukraine. Do you agree? Thank you.
Thank you. It is clear that all our efforts have to be also complementary to U.S. efforts, and ministers were also very clear about this. We are not, coming in instead of the United States, but we are actually addressing the issues that they haven't been addressing in these talks. Recently, it was last week when the majority of foreign ministers of European Union met with the Secretary of State of U.S. In NATO, and actually also were discussing how this process goes forward.
First of all, you said there were some new ideas in the room for what these conditions could be. Can you tell us any more about what those ideas were? And then, is there any consensus on those conditions you put forward? For example, restrictions on Russia's military or withdrawal of those troops from Georgia and Moldova. Are these merely your ideas, or can we think of them as EU conditions at this stage? And to both of you, if the EU won't be a mediator and the US won't be a mediator, who should mediate? I'm aware that your Saudi Arabian counterpart was in the room today. Have you got any ideas? Thank you.
Thank you. There were some additional ideas put forward. For example, the issue of Ukrainian civilian detainees, because there have been also, journalists detained in the occupied territories, that these should also be raised. Ukrainian children, return of them. It is also in the interest of Europe that these children are returned. And then on the question of the troops, Russian troops in Moldova, Georgia. So it is one idea, because when we talk about European core security interests, then it is not in the interest of not those countries, not us. If those countries are looking or trying to be, on the European path, then that there are Russian troops stationed there. It's a clear security risk, and it is in our interest that they are moved. So nobody was opposing that. So it is still there. Thank you. Just one more thing on, who could be mediator. I think it is very important that we push Ukraine and Russia to talk to each other, because there are so many issues where only they can decide and nobody else. So we can, there can be countries that do this shuttle diplomacy, but in the end, it has to be them who sit down on these issues that only they can decide.
I just want to get back to the Iran war, and you've mentioned that on freedom of navigation, that SPIDAS could be expanded and that more resources are needed. I just wanted to ask you, what kind of resources? Can you outline the vision of how the EU will respond to ensure freedom of navigation once hostilities end for certain?
Yes. Thank you. So our naval mission, what it needs is more ships. So that it is a very simple answer. Of course, the discussion is also, if we look at the mandate of the operation as SPIDAS, then it actually covers the wide area. We only have to change the operational plan of this mandate. But if we want to also add demining ships, then we need to change the mandate as well, because we have countries that have demining ships. But it is a defensive operation, like you said, after the end of the hostilities, willing to recruit the ships, escort the ships out of the Strait of via the Strait of Hormuz, because it's also needed later on. But it mostly needs more ships.